Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks everyone for joining us today for the webinar, The Power of Social Connection, Memory Cafes, and Tete-a-Tete. The National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar series is supported by the Administration for Community Living. Before we start, Erin Long of the Administration for Community Living will provide a brief welcome. Erin?
Hi everyone. On behalf of the Administration for Community Living, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this extremely important topic that we're going to be discussing today. I want to thank Beth Salzberg from Boston, from JF and CS in Boston, and Dr. Maria Ordonez from Florida Atlantic University for sharing their wisdom and information on their projects with us today. With that, again, thank you for your time, and back to you, Sari.
Thanks so much, Erin. As you heard from Erin, today's presenters are Beth Salzberg and Dr. Maria Ordonez. Beth Salzberg is a social worker and a program director at Jewish Family and Children's Service in Boston, Massachusetts. She runs the Jewish Family and Children's Service Memory Cafe, is founding director of the Percolator Memory Cafe Network, leads the Dementia Friends Massachusetts Public Awareness Program, and serves on the Dementia Friendly Massachusetts leadership team. We also have with us today Dr. Maria Ordonez, who is a board-certified gerontological and psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner who specializes in caring for older adults through diagnosis, treatment, and management of age-associated acute and chronic conditions. Her practice seeks to transform healthcare environments by providing culturally responsive and linguistically appropriate science-based care interventions for aging populations, and is dedicated to meeting the needs of unserved and underserved minority communities. We appreciate your attendance today, and I will turn the presentation over to our speakers.
Thank you, Sari. This is Beth. I'm very happy to be here with everyone today. Thank you to Steve, Sari, and Erin, and I'm delighted to be presenting together with Maria. I'd also like to give thanks to Susan McFadden, who is a Memory Cafe leader in Wisconsin. And Susan and I have done a lot of thinking together about memory cafes, so some of her insight is reflected in these slides as well. Today we're going to talk briefly about what a memory cafe is and some factors that help make a cafe successful. I will touch briefly on the role that a memory cafe network plays. And I do have to acknowledge I'm going to be speaking quickly to get through a lot of material, but these topics and more are covered in greater detail in the free Memory Cafe Toolkit and recorded webinars and many other resources that are found on our website, which you see there, jfcsboston.org/percolator. So please feel free to visit the website. The toolkit is available in English and Spanish to download for free, and I was fortunate to be able to update the toolkit in August 2019 thanks to a grant, an ADI-SSS grant from the Administration for Community Living to the Massachusetts Councils on Aging, which then subcontracted with me for that. So it's nice and current information. So just to let you know where I'm coming from, as Sari mentioned, I run a memory cafe in Waltham, which is in Greater Boston, Massachusetts. I've been doing that since early 2014. And shortly after starting the cafe, I also launched the Percolator Memory Cafe Network to help other organizations start cafes. And at this point, there are 115 cafes in the state of Massachusetts. If you live in the Greater Boston region or some of the other regions, you can go to a cafe every week or even more often if you want to. And that has been wonderful to see this flourishing and learn from the experience of all these cafes. So why do cafes, and they are sometimes called Alzheimer's cafes, sometimes memory cafes, why do they exist? And this quote is the reason. This is something that I have heard many times. I'm sure folks on the line have heard from people living with dementia and from the people in their lives, is all our friends disappeared. And so the primary goal of memory cafes is really to address that, to reduce social isolation, both for the person living with the disease and also for family members and friends. that group that we sort of call care partners. There have been very few studies to evaluate cafes, so we don't have a very large evidence base to demonstrate this impact. And I have included research citations at the end of the presentation, but I will mention a study published in 2017 by Greenwood et al. That looked at the experience of care partners and found that they gained a sense of support, acceptance, and normalcy by attending. Now, those of us who run memory cafes know from experience that people vote with their feet, and they show up, and they show up. And many of our guests have told us that the cafe really provides a unique opportunity to leave the disease at the door and to feel accepted and connected by others. So what are the key ingredients that make a cafe a cafe? A welcoming atmosphere overall. It has to feel homey and welcoming, a focus on social connection, and a program that's designed both for care partners and for the people who are living with dementia. Cafes serve people whose dementia is at any stage, pardon me, due to any underlying condition. It's very important that no one is asked if they have a diagnosis or what that is. Pardon me for the frog in my throat. Cafes are tailored to local interests, different based on language, based on needs. You'll be hearing more from Maria about a culturally, linguistically tailored model. In Massachusetts, we have cafes right now operating in 4 different languages. And certainly every cafe should be unique and different to meet these needs. So where did cafes come from? Dr. Beer Meesen started the very first cafe, which he called an Alzheimer's cafe, in Holland, and that was 1997. And they have spread throughout the world. The first cafes came to the U.S. in 2008 to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Roseville, Minnesota. Most states now have several cafes. Wisconsin and Massachusetts each have over 100. So now I want to dive into some of the tips and pearls about how to make a cafe run effectively. So where to hold your cafe? It's really like what the realtors say. It's location, location, location. Here in Massachusetts, we have cafes meeting in all kinds of places. Senior centers and libraries are the most common, but you see a list here with many other settings. One of the newer cafes meets at a bowling alley. So the sky is the limit, really. Pardon me. However, there's some important things to consider. Clearly, the building needs to be accessible. You need parking. But you also want it to be viewed as a friendly, inviting, inclusive space. So long-term care residences and day programs, to some extent, have had a little bit of a hard time attracting participants from outside their organization because guests might not want to go to a setting that they think of as providing services that perhaps they're going to need in the future and they don't need now. And really, there's a lot of stigma. So acknowledging that, settings that bring together people of different ages, different sectors of the community, for example, a library or a house of worship, do have an advantage in attracting participation. If you do hold a cafe in a public space, such as a restaurant, you'll want to make sure that there's a private room or just a way to create a bit of an enclosed space for privacy and also to minimize distractions. So let's talk about inclusion, outreach, and attendance. Memory cafes strive to be inclusive. They're all about addressing stigma and providing a stigma-free place. So inclusion is just naturally a core value. One question that sometimes comes up when people are starting cafes is whether they should include just people with early stage dementia or people with dementia at any stage. And with everything I'm saying, I'm just offering advice and reflections. No one owns the cafe model, so certainly different organizations will make choices, and that's fine. But I can let you know there are some advantages to serving people at any stage. You will not need to screen or exclude people. And to have to do that is really an enormous process, and it might not be something that you really have the staffing to support. Also, you'll be able to serve people for longer, which helps to build that sense of community, which is so important in an effective cafe. So disease progression can be rapid, and oftentimes people find their way to a cafe a little bit later in the disease process. So if you're limiting it to people at an early stage, you may have folks cycling through pretty quickly, and that undermines that sense of community. Now, if you're concerned about what it would be like to serve guests with advanced dementia or to have guests who are at a variety of different stages, here are a couple things to keep in mind. One of the suggestions I make is to require that your guests who need personal care assistance bring a care partner with them. There are a handful of cafes that actually have nurses' aides or other assistants on staff who can provide that hands-on support, but that's very rare. Most cafes really are not staffed to do that. So if you make it very clear in your literature that anyone who needs personal care assistance does have to bring someone with them, then you know you've got the hands on deck and you've got folks who know your guests with dementia right there to provide any assistance if it should be needed. The Percolator did a survey we had 56 cafes responding in, this was 2018, and they indicated that cafes rarely are having problems with guests due to dementia symptoms. So only 9 cafes of 56 reported that they'd ever had to take steps beyond typical practices due to a guest's behaviors. And it's just interesting that more reported having difficulties with staff or volunteers or guest facilitators due to insufficient knowledge about dementia. In a few minutes, we'll talk about tips for keeping your cafe guests happy and minimizing even these rare issues. So inclusive and specialized cafes are both important. So I always tell cafe coordinators to keep the Mr. Rogers question in mind. Who are the people in your neighborhood? And then see if you're serving all the people in your neighborhood. And if you're not, to think about the barriers that might be there and how to overcome them. In addition to inclusion, there is also a need for specialized cafes. Massachusetts right now has Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese-speaking cafes, and we hope that cafes will develop in other languages as well. 9 Massachusetts cafes receive funds from our State Department of Developmental Services to include people with an intellectual developmental disability plus dementia. And there are also cafes that cater to particular interests. So this is a photo from Plymouth, England, where they have a cafe for, as they call them, football fans. We say soccer, and they meet at the stadium. And as you'll hear from Maria shortly, Tete-a-Tete serves the Haitian Creole community. I'll just mention that on the Percolator webpage there is a recorded webinar in Spanish about starting a Spanish-speaking cafe, and also a recorded webinar about cafes that work to include people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have also developed dementia. So attendance is often one of the biggest challenges for cafes when they're getting started. The Percolator did a survey a few months ago, and there were 67 cafes that reported. Average attendance was 13 people per cafe meeting, but that included a very wide range. There were cafes that, when they started, sometimes had no people show up. That's very rare, but of course it's disheartening when it happens. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a cafe in Greater Boston that regularly has 45, 50 people. Here is the key. The best referral source, what we find from this survey and a previous survey, is word of mouth. and this just takes time to build. You're dealing with the fact that the general public is not very familiar with memory cafes, and there is a lot of stigma about dementia in general, so it's hard for people to talk about needs that they may have. And then there's also not much staff time to do outreach. Most cafes are run on a shoestring budget, and so these are barriers. So assume that it's going to take 6 months to a year for that word of mouth to really help build your attendance. It's important to be flexible about attendance. Even if the cafe requires an RSVP, people may get up that day with the intention of coming and it's just not a good day, things aren't working, or flip side, it may be a good day and people come who hadn't RSVP'd. So it's good to be flexible. It's not a failure if it's a small number of people. You're often providing a really, really vital social opportunity, even if it's just a handful of people who come on a particular day. I do recommend requiring that if someone wants to bring a group, for example, from residential care or a day program, require that they contact you in advance to arrange that so that you don't have a van pull up and suddenly 15 people come out and they may not have enough staff with them and so on. One other thing I'd like to mention is that attending cafes together is a wonderful way for friends to stay connected to someone who's living with dementia. At my cafe, we've had groups of friends who've been meeting together for years, and one person in the group has developed dementia, and they come to a cafe together, and lots of pairs of friends. So it's a really nice opportunity to be together, to continue that connection, but for the friend who is the care partner not to feel that they have to keep the conversation going all by themselves, and for them to get ideas of things that they can do together and both enjoy. So activities, let's talk about some activities that work for all. These are fairly typical activities at cafes. Music is huge. Singing, dancing, drumming is wonderful. Improv, anything that really capitalizes on being in the moment and spontaneous. And it can include trying things that people have never done before, writing poetry together, doing theater games, etc. I think it's really important to keep in mind that you want it to be failure-free. You don't want it to be focused on producing some kind of product. The creative arts are really wonderful at a cafe because there's no wrong answers. Language is not required, and language is often hard for people as their dementia progresses because it's so complicated. The creative arts help us connect emotionally. And try for things that are multisensory. This is something I'm doing more and more at my cafe. If we are doing storytelling, I'll have a slideshow very slowly advancing in the background so that participants who might come that day and really have trouble with language have something else that they can enjoy. And of course, food and any kind of fun little props on the table can help bring in that multisensory element. So some tips. Resist the temptation to overschedule. It's much better to have one simple activity planned and then allow it to unfold, allow time for spontaneous conversation and sharing rather than having a sense of pressure to get from one thing to another. Second, make it interactive. Tell guest facilitators it's not a performance. They are coming to facilitate an activity that everyone takes part in. And I should say you don't have to have guest facilitators. Some cafes do and some don't. But I think if the Beatles themselves appeared at your cafe and started to play, after 15 minutes people would be done with it unless they were able to sing along. It's incredibly important for people to be able to participate. I mentioned making it failure-free. You want to avoid intrusive background music because that can be distracting. Consider opportunities for guests to do or make things for others, to volunteer during their time at the cafe. Once a year, our cafe guests make cards for our program for Holocaust survivors. It's really good for the soul to have a chance to do and give for others as well as to receive. We want to be careful about people feeling infantilized. So if you're doing something, for example, making collages, talk about Matisse or some other tradition that connects with that art that people will recognize as an adult kind of tradition. If a guest is loud or uninhibited, just acknowledge that all responses are welcome. You really want everyone to understand that first and foremost this is about community. Every cafe crowd is different, so try things, ask for feedback. Volunteers are wonderful at a cafe, and their main job is party hosts. They are smiling faces and helping hands. They can help make your cafe crowd more representative of your community, more multi-generational. The volunteers learn so much. They really gain a different view of dementia because they're seeing people in a very joyful, strengths-based environment. They do need some kind of supervision, brief training or support, and that can be done different ways. It can be done in person just before the cafe starts, at a separate time, or just with written tip sheets. I partner with a local university, and that has worked very well for me and for a number of cafes that I know of. Let's talk about money, everyone's favorite topic. Fortunately, cafes are inexpensive to run. They cost around $8,000 to $12,000 annually. The biggest cost there is the coordinator's time. Most coordinators are on staff at their host organization. There are a few coordinators who do this as a volunteer, but it's a big volunteer project, so it's not always sustainable over time. Business sponsorships help many cafes cover expenses and engage the broader community. Just make sure you have a written sponsorship agreement that sets clear boundaries because you don't want the business to use it as a marketing opportunity that feels uncomfortable to your guests. Really briefly, let's talk about the role of a network which can help cafes spread in your region. So it can increase the number and variety of cafes. And first and foremost, it helps to coordinate scheduling so that cafes meet at complementary times of the day, of the week and month rather than conflicting with one another. I had mentioned that in our region, people can go to cafes every week or even more often if they want. And there are plenty of people who do, who are cafe hoppers, and it's wonderful for them to have that opportunity. That's only possible if there's some coordination so that as new cafes come online, they are not scheduled at the same time as nearby cafes. A network helps to set some kind of quality guidelines. Even though, again, no one owns this concept, there's no copyright. People can put out a shingle and say this is a memory cafe. Having some kind of network helps to reinforce certain values and standards so that it makes it less likely, I think, for a business to just try to use it as a marketing opportunity. A network is a great way to increase awareness among the general public and referral sources. It can help to build the stature of the model and thus attract grant money and other resources, and to foster collaboration with related organizations and activities, such as a dementia-friendly community program, for example. So I want to end by pointing you towards some resources. Again, we have the toolkit in English and Spanish, which gives you a step-by-step guide to starting your own cafe with a lot of downloadable, editable worksheets that you can use for different aspects of your planning. Several videos that I had mentioned, and there's also a video on how to create a memory cafe network and a brand new TED Talk on memory cafes. And there's also a 60-second video in both English and Spanish that shows several cafes in action. So it's a good resource for showing people who might want to come to a cafe and are nervous about it and want to see what it's all about first. I had mentioned Susan McFadden. This is her Memory Cafe Best Practice Guide. It's excellent. There are many websites that you can look to and get some resources. Jutta Ludwig, who started the first memory cafe in the United States, has written a book, which is at the bottom of this slide, available on Amazon. So you have many resources to turn to. And here are the research citations that I had mentioned. So I know that you're able to download the slides and you can look at those when you have a chance. feel free to contact me. People participate in the Percolator Network in our quarterly meetings via Zoom from all over the country and several other countries as well. So please feel free to get in touch. And with that, I will pass it on to Maria.
Thank you very much, Beth, and thank you, Sari and Steve and Erin, for the introduction and invitation, and Beth for your wonderful presentation. And thank you to everyone listening and participating in today's webinar. I am going to discuss how our team translated some of the concepts that Beth presented and share into our practice. And this is a disclaimer. This presentation and its subject, the Tête-à-Tête project, were partially funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration on Aging, and Administration for Community Living. And the information that I will share comes from our findings and conclusions while carrying out this project. The points of view, background information, and the lessons that we learned along the way do not necessarily represent official AOA, ACL, or DHHS policy. And the takeaways that I hope that you will get from attending today's presentation are how to identify specific challenges minority communities face when trying to access dementia-capable care and supportive services and how to mitigate them, and how our team created the Tête-à-Tête, a Memory Café-inspired program for a Haitian Creole-speaking faith-based community. And our the lead agency is the Louis and Anne Green Memory and Wellness Center, which is our state-designated memory disorder clinic, and also an Alzheimer's disease specialized adult day center. And we are located on the Boca Raton campus of Florida Atlantic University in southeastern Florida. And our innovative nurse-led model is grounded in caring science. And caring science is the foundational philosophy and theory that guides our College of Nursing practice, research, teaching, and service. And our main core value for this philosophy is interconnectedness and co-creating healing environments and to enhance the capacity to generate vibrant and flourishing communities. And the importance of community was beautifully highlighted in last month's webinar. I'm not sure if some of you had the opportunity to attend, and is certainly significant today in our Memory Café concepts and practical application. And at the center, we have a person, family, community-centered partnering approach to care that is culturally and linguistically responsive with an interprofessional team-based education and practice model. And the grant program that enabled us to expand our specialized services beyond the physical space of the center out into the community is titled Bridging the Gap, Providing Specialized Dementia Care and Supportive Services Through Community Partnerships. My colleague, Dr. Deborah Hain, and I led the writing in response to the U.S. Administration for Community Living grant opportunity through their Alzheimer's disease initiative, specialized supportive services, and we will always be thankful for the funding received in August of 2015 and the ongoing guidance from Erin Long, her team, and the National Alzheimer's Dementia Resource Center. And the essence of this grant is building, cultivating, nurturing, and sustaining relationships with individuals and organizations as community partners, who are the cornerstone of this transformative community engagement approach. Our target population are persons living with or at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, including those living with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their family caregivers. More specifically, we targeted aging persons living alone or with a family caregiver who were living in their homes, including those from underserved and unserved communities such as Spanish and Haitian Creole-speaking populations. The goals of this grant were to improve health outcomes, such as quality of life of our target population, and also to expand access to the Memory and Wellness Center's academic-based dementia-capable programs. And we see our goal attainment as a pathway to transform existing suboptimal biomedical models of care into psychosocial, supportive, educational, and community-based systems of care. The traditional healthcare delivery model available is insufficient and ineffective, and we believe that it leaves dangerous and widening gaps that continue to ignore the family and community components of the patient care continuum, creating silos and gaps in community healthcare. As Beth mentioned, Memory Cafe is a global concept and has been practiced since the late 1990s. The model offers peer support and benefits both the person living with the disease and their caregivers. We designed our cafe to offer cognitively stimulating, educational, socially and emotionally engaging, and spiritually uplifting activities in a safe, familiar, and comfortable setting. And to accomplish this, we collaborated with a faith-based community in our service area. We started by assessing the needs of the population living in the community and tailored our intervention accordingly. And you see in this picture that our faith-based community is actively engaged, and I will share more details in a few moments. The name of our intervention, Tête-à-Tête, is a very meaningful concept in Haitian culture, and it means head to head. In other words, it means a meeting of like minds who come together to connect and share information. And this creates an environment that promotes sharing and gaining understanding and knowledge of self and the other through caring, connecting, and engaging. Madeline Michel is a key member of our team and is a native Haitian Creole speaker who with lived experience of the culture and nursing expertise, who co-created and co-led the program implementation. She was the one who baptized this Memory Cafe as Tête-à-Tête, and the one who consistently nurtured the community with her joyful presence, caring passion, and knowledge. And you can see Madeline leading one of the Tête-à-Tête sessions in this picture. Our community partner for the Tête-à-Tête was Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church of Delray Beach, Florida, that serves a Haitian American congregation. The pastor of the church appointed a nurse practitioner from the church's congregation, who is also native Haitian Creole speaker, to be our community partner liaison. And the pastor also welcomed our team to the community and introduced them to the congregation. And this slide shows how we got started. As I mentioned, we started by assessing the needs of the population, and the community partner liaison completed a baseline dementia capability assessment of the community. And the results of this assessment guided the co-creation of the program. The assessment revealed a great need of dementia-specific services within the community, but no access to those due to language barrier, lack of transportation options, and lack of knowledge. The lack of understanding in the community about the difference between what is normal aging and what is dementia was identified to be the greatest need for them. Furthermore, initially, the team needed to address and hope to reduce the cultural stigma about dementia and begin to build trust among the population. And this was achieved by educating the staff of the church about Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and actively participating in events at the church to learn more about the unique individual needs of the population. And to address the two additional identified barriers that I mentioned, such as the language and transportation, the grant team brought the dementia specialized services from the Memory and Wellness Center out into the community and provided all services in the participants' native language and using providers who know and lived in the participants' culture. And the grant and the community partner team concluded that the tete-a-tete was an ideal setting to gain access to this community and begin gaining their trust by interacting with the church members in a manner that was approved and guided by their faith and community leaders. And this faith community was attracted to the idea of socializing after church services, engaging in activities, and also learning about brain and overall health in their own language and from their cultural perspective. The model that worked best for this community, as I mentioned, was a Sunday after church services event and was a monthly hour-to-hour and a half event. And the events were held at the church and provided a familiar setting for the participants. The materials shared were made culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate and included educational presentations and activities such as arts and crafts, dancing, singing, and physical exercise. And the team has continuously evaluated the process, content, and success of the program based on the participants' engagement and responses. Need for program improvement or adjustment and identification of additional services were part of our ongoing, what we call, quality improvement process throughout the progression of the grant. And the image that you see on this slide is one of the flyers that our team created and shared within the church community and its surroundings to recruit or invite participants. The tete-a-tete has served as a venue or bridge to connect this faith-based community to our dementia-capable programs. And our intention was to identify individual and population health needs and to remain present and connected to the community. In addition to the tete-a-tete community engagement, we have offered free memory screenings at the church's health fair, comprehensive geriatric memory-focused assessments as home visits. We have identified and addressed the needs of the family caregivers by implementing an intervention that our team created as part of this grant. And we also remained attentive and responsive to sharing and providing referrals to community resources. Some of the challenges that our team had to overcome to successfully work with this community included how to decrease the participants' distrust of the U.S. healthcare system, uncertain immigration status, and the fear to access healthcare. The team had to work on tailoring a culturally sensitive program based on an understanding of cultural beliefs and practice and allowing a common ground for communication. It was important for our team to know that the Haitian health belief system focuses on the natural or supernatural causes of the disease, and they view disease as an act of God or a negative spiritual aspect, or sometimes as harm from an outside source. And other considerations were the participants' literacy rate, including health literacy, language barrier, and lack of materials in Haitian Creole, and the transportation issues and lack of knowledge regarding Alzheimer's disease and related dementias that I mentioned. Some of the strategies that the team used to gain access to this population were first assessing their needs, knowledge, and attitudes regarding the disease in the community and bringing the services to them. And the team also engaged the community as a whole and utilized culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate providers and materials in their preferred language. And we also used materials and teaching techniques that do not require learners to be literate and provided education to increase the participants' health literacy level. And specific strategies included presenting the educational program in the participants' own language and also using native expressions or metaphors. In addition, being a faith-based community, like I already presented, was a comfortable setting for them, and it made an atmosphere of ease, and that enhanced their motivation to participate and to increase their knowledge. In addition, the goal of the project leader during the educational sessions was to incorporate and reach a balance on faith, health beliefs, and the needs of the whole person, including the mind, the body, and the spirit. This slide presents some of our experiences. We did surveys to learn preferences of the parishioners, but these were part of the preparation. And also our collaboration with the community partner was extremely important, and an ongoing assessment of overall progress and unique needs is a required element. The program was made possible by the grant that I explained, but also required a cost sharing, meaning the Memory and Wellness Center's contribution included sharing time, expertise, and space. Furthermore, the nurse practitioner leading the effort ran a successful fundraiser to organize the trip to a local park to promote socialization and physical activity. And also the tete-a-tete led to the creation of an additional program at the church, a weekly Zumba class, which has developed to increase physical activity in the community. And this new activity has served as the foundation for the lead nurse practitioner doctoral project titled in part Wellness Through Action, which is ongoing at this time. I do have several success stories to share with you, and to this date, the tete-a-tete has received over 300 participants. Over 90% of the participants reported improved quality of life, increased knowledge on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and on other aging-related topics, overall satisfaction about the program, and improved socialization. And it is noteworthy to point out that regardless of the level of education, gender, marital status, caregiver experience, work or retirement, and the ability to read or write, a culturally sensitive, socially engaging educational program in the participants' own language using native expressions or metaphors like I shared before was conducive to learning. And also the participants expressed being motivated to learn about Alzheimer's disease, related dementias, brain, and overall health. The participants also showed interest in other subjects and a willingness to open up and ask questions. They voiced interest for the project leader to organize more education programs to learn more on the chronic diseases affecting the memory, and this interest can only be considered in our understanding as an accomplishment, considering the challenges that I mentioned before. On this slide, I am presenting some of the qualitative data or quotes from our participants, things that the participants shared that experienced these benefits by attending the program. So they said the experience decreased social isolation, positive peer pressure, they enjoyed the group activities, caring structure of the gatherings improved ongoing participation, improved skills on caring for self, they felt they had a sense of empowerment and a sense of accomplishment through learning. And through the tete-a-tete, our team achieved several goals and outcomes. Improved health outcomes of this previously unserved aging minority community in Palm Beach County. We also expanded access to our Memory Wellness Center's dementia specialized programs of care and supportive services. And also, we felt that the health literacy was improved since, by having improved health outcomes, the people felt that they were more actively participating in their own care. Also, the team transformed the existing suboptimal healthcare model by opening access to a person-family-centered community participatory healthcare model. Ultimately, the dementia capability of the community was improved. And for example, before we initiated the tete-a-tete, the church staff did not identify persons living with memory or cognitive concerns or had any system to refer them to any appropriate resources. Now they have a process to identify those individuals with concerns by interviewing them and working with them and their families to detect changes for example, and refer them to either our programs or any other community resources as appropriate. Also, the parish nurse is now working with individuals when transitioning care from different healthcare facilities back to their homes. And she's also collaborating with a ministry within their church to pay special attention to those aging individuals living alone with or without memory concerns. And the church liaison reported that the participants of the tete-a-tete have reported decreased social isolation and increased interactions and activities overall in their lives. And also inspired by the tete-a-tete, they plan additional programs and activities for the upcoming year, including a picnic and also an educational piece to teach older adults how to communicate with their healthcare providers and how to ask questions when they have appointments with them. I'm going to briefly mention that we are grateful that in March 2019 we have received a new expansion grant from the ACL, an 18-month program, which is going to allow us to continue to spread the Memory Cafe inspired activities with new community partners, Spanish-speaking faith-based communities, and also community-based organizations serving persons living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and intellectual and developmental disabilities, specifically Down syndrome. So Beth, you can count on me looking at, sharing, you share resources for the wealth of information, and that's going to guide also our work. And here are some of our references, and my last slide is a thank you, merci. Thank you all for listening, and all my gratitude to my team and community partner team. Without each one of your contributions, this important work could not be possible. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to both Beth and Maria for your presentations. They were excellent. We have some questions that are coming in already, and we'd like to get to those. Please enter additional questions into the question and answer pod on your webinar page in front of you. And we will start with a few of the questions that have already come in. There's a question that came in asking about how you can welcome participants to a Memory Cafe. This person writes that some family caregivers tell her that if she says anything about it being a memory cafe, it may scare their loved one. Are there any suggestions that you have for how to start the conversation?
This is Beth. Yeah, I think that this is an ongoing challenge, and sometimes the individual living with cognitive changes has made it clear, I won't set foot in a program that has anything to do with Alzheimer's or anything to do with dementia. And sometimes the family member is making that assumption, and they're imagining a barrier that might not actually be as high as it is. But in any case, I think that the name of the program can help or hinder. I love the name Tete-a-Tete because it's grounded in the cultural community, and I think that's a wonderful name. And what I'm seeing Memory Cafes doing in our area is choosing names that are going to provide the right kind of image. And in some cases, they make the name Memory Cafe very small on their flyers. So they might have a bigger name, that, Rita's Cafe or something like that. There's wonderful cafe names out there. So you need to somehow convey what the program is for, but you don't have to lead with the disease. And that's the reason the term Memory Cafe was coined. The original term is Alzheimer's Cafe. And Beer Mason really was advocating for us to use the term Alzheimer's and take some of the edge off it by having people become less afraid to say it. And so there's a good rationale to doing that. On the flip side, there are some people who really, you have to sort of meet them where they are, and the name would be too much of a barrier. Also, not everybody who attends has Alzheimer's. People have all kinds of underlying conditions. So I find that the term memory cafe is more broadly accepted, but it is still a problem for some people, but for many. And I often encourage family members to say, hey, I heard about this event. They're going to be singing there, or they're going to be doing what have you, or maybe I know someone who's going to this. They told me about it. Let's just go. It sounds like fun. Let's just try it. If we don't like it, we can leave. It's not the kind of program where you have to go through an elaborate screening. Again, no one's going to ask for the person's diagnosis. No one's going to raise the topic of dementia unless the guest chooses to raise it. So it really is a pretty open door to come in and give it a try. And more times than not, once people come, they are happy to come back. Maria, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes. Thank you, Beth, for that explanation. Absolutely, important elements. And, for us also, that having that community liaison in, the church, that, the participants know her, trust her. She was really our bridge to, connecting and inviting others. And then, of course, then is, the word of mouth. But a key aspect of, the success and having people feel comfortable, or having that initial fear of the unknown, as we know it, and also the stigma of the memory. And if they're experiencing, difficulties, they may feel, uncomfortable until they are comfortable, right? And that is a process. But definitely that liaison at the church was instrumental, I speak of the buy-in of not only the community members, but also the team within. So whoever is, of course, organizing the memory cafes, then, create this community also within their own, process. So definitely the community partner liaison working, with the organizing memory cafe is also a suggestion.
Great, thank you. There's quite a few questions that have come in about the staffing of the Memory Cafe. Are there any requirements that either of you have set up for specific disciplines to run the Memory Cafe? Does it have to be a social worker or a recreational therapist or an occupational therapist? Or is there such a thing as having too many volunteers? Can you speak a little bit to the staffing of the Memory Cafe, maybe a staffing that has worked out really well and other things that go into that category?
This is Beth. So I see cafes being coordinated by people from a variety of disciplines. They certainly don't need to have any particular degree or certification in order to do it. They certainly do need to have a philosophy about full inclusion of people living with disabilities, and they need to have the goal that they're helping people live well with dementia. So it's very important that they have a belief that this is about living to the fullest, and it's not, sort of a charitable kind of program where anyone's feeling sorry for people. They need to certainly have the opportunity to learn about dementia. So sometimes people have been care partners, sometimes it's family life experience that's brought them to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a particular degree or credential. When there have been volunteers running a cafe on their own, I often encourage them to form a close partnership, perhaps with the outreach worker or social worker at their local council on aging, or another community provider, just so that if issues come up and they need some support and backing, they have that. And I would say I have had, I think over the years, maybe twice, I had cafes where there were more volunteers there than there were guests, because we had so many volunteers who came on a particular day, and it was not a problem for the guests. For the volunteers, when I saw that this was going to happen, I just emailed them all and I let them know, and I let them know it was wonderful they were going to be there. We were going to have a very good time, and that they shouldn't feel disappointed about it, because I think it was more an issue of whether the volunteers would have certain expectations that might not be met. But, you know, since the cafes in our area, they're kind of like little parties. It doesn't hurt to have lots of people coming from any place, as long as they're coming with the right intentions.
Great, thank you. Maria, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just quickly, yes, thank you, Beth. Absolutely, you know, working as a team and including everyone, like Beth mentioned, all of this, you know, for us, you know, that the team, not only here at the center, but at the community, you know, understood and aligned, you know, with their philosophy and, you know, valuing everyone, whether it is, you know, of course, a volunteer, a student. We're all, you know, an important part of the community and that circle of caring or community, caring community. So as long as you work as a team, and like Beth said, you know, the more the merrier, and everybody, you know, having a joyful time, you know, at that moment, that day, is what, you know, creates that meaningful atmosphere, and everybody feels welcome. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see, we just have time for one more question. Can you talk a little bit about if either of you know of a national listing of memory cafes that's available? I know that there's some listings for specific regions. Is there anywhere where people can find whether there's a memory cafe in their area?
Yes,
you
I
may
think
know that.
The most current listing is at the following website, memorycafedirectory.com, and that is listed in my resource slides. So that's run by a gentleman who just took that on as a public service project, and he gets advertising to defray some of the costs. Dr. Jutta Ludwig in Santa Fe, New Mexico, has a lot of information and a directory on her website too. I'm not sure, it's very labor intensive to keep up a national directory, and I'm not actually sure where she is with that, but the alzheimerscafe.com is her website. But I think people are typically visiting memorycafedirectory.com to see what's available in their state.
Great, thank you so much. Well, it looks like we have come to the end of our hour. I want to thank both of our speakers for fantastic presentations and providing some excellent information to our participants. I'm just going to hand the mic over to Steve Moore for some closing remarks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I want to thank our presenters for being here with us today.